in a lot of monogamous marriages, that orgasm gap manifests in the following way. He thinks, oh, well, she's just not the kind of woman who can have an orgasm from intercourse. And
Mm.
she thinks she isn't either. When in reality, orgasm is a learned skill. You're not born knowing how to have orgasms from penetrative sex.
Susan, I'm so happy that you're here. This is a very important topic, and I have to say, this is the first time that I've talked about sex in the media because it's just not it's not what I do or talk about. But the act of sexual experience, sexual intimacy, vulnerability, our sacred experience with one another, I think it's vitally important, and I'm thrilled that you're here today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for bringing sexuality into a spiritual conversation because for me personally, having taught people a practice called expanded orgasm for going on 20 years now and having my own expanded orgasm practice where essentially my partner and I've been married for 30 years to my husband, we have the ability through orgasm to connect with source.
Mm.
And that is so incredibly profound that when I began to have those experiences 20, 25 years ago, I I realized that this was what I wanted to help expose the world to, that sex doesn't have to be friction. It doesn't have to just be our genitals rubbing together and getting off, if you will, but
Yeah.
it can be, I like to say, I like to transform having sex into making love,
Hmm.
into creating the feeling of being loved and love making. Um, I like to talk about heart connected, passionate love making techniques. If you said, what's the Susan Bratton brand, if you will, that's what it is. It's those things that you never see them in the movies. You certainly don't see them in pornography, which is so degrading to women. We're not taught this in school. Our parents aren't our models for that, nor would we want them to be, frankly.
Right.
And so, unless we get lucky and we come across someone who's kind of like a natural born lover, or we have the craving for the soul connection that lovemaking provides, we can go our whole lives never having that. And that's really what I love to do, is I love to let people know that there's a path you can follow to have that kind of soul connection with yourself and with a lover.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I know you refer to yourself as an intimacy expert. So just for
I
those
do.
listening, Susan isn't a therapist and she's not, a trauma expert. And we're not going to dig into all of the reasons why we can't have, uh, you know, the type of sex, or we haven't had perhaps the type of sex that we've wanted to have, because so many of those reasons are often attached to our wounded state or our
Yeah.
core wounds or limited beliefs we have about ourselves and insecurities. But we're also two women who have been through a lifetime of experience, and your wisdom and your experience. I believe I read on your website that you as well went through a traumatic sexual or a sexual assault or a sexual
Many things.
many
if it
things.
if it
Yes.
could have happened to you, it happened to me.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people, both men and women, who have had oftentimes, untalked about experiences in their life that left a very difficult scar,
Yeah.
not only on in their sexual life, but in their mental health and their emotional health. And then, as we all know, in society, this idea of, well, I have to look right, and the women trying to hold their stomachs in, or want to turn the lights off because we don't want to be seen. There's so many factors, and so I think what you do is really important, just helping people to learn how to have fun with sex. And well, you can tell us everything that you do, but it's a really important part of opening up to this world that for many people, I don't know if you know the numbers. I believe women have less orgasms than men. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Lori Mintz did a really great TED talk called "The Orgasm Gap" that talked about her. Was a pretty large data set. I think it was probably 3,800 to 4,200 people, and she found that 95% of the time, the typical male bodied person can achieve satisfying sex from intercourse, but 65% of the time, some women can. And so she
Mm.
called that the orgasm gap, the delta between how easy it is for men and how hard it is for women. And the heartbreaking part about it is that, I've been working for over 15 years, not one on one with people. What I do is I publish passionate lovemaking techniques, kind of like, well, what solved my marital issue of a loss of intimacy was going to sex workshops and learning how to have good sex. And what I realized is that not everybody has thousands of dollars and can come to the San Francisco Bay Area or what have you and take these sex workshops. And I wanted to put them online so that people could access healing and educational sexuality experiences that were heart connected and passionate, that taught them how to make love together or by themselves. And I think that's where this all started, was wanting to give people the opportunity to let go of the traumas, the shames, and all of the things that stand in our way from connecting our hearts and our bodies together at the same time.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's interesting when you, well, thank you, first of all, for all the publications that you've put out. And, I've only written 3 books. I can't imagine writing 48 books or what have you. But, the things that get in our way, there's so many things that get in our way of allowing
Yeah.
ourselves to have fun and pleasure. And one of the things, when I think of it, is beyond or before we even consider having that kind of freedom and sexual excitement with another person,
Mm.
is the ability to have pleasure for ourselves. And we can talk about sexual pleasure, or we can also just talk about any kind of pleasure, men and women, both of us, but in particular, I think more women,
Mm.
we haven't been taught, as you said, and we don't feel comfortable. In fact, a lot of us have been shamed, and we're,
Mhm.
not encouraged to take care of our sexual health on our own. And so there's many, many women out there that haven't had an orgasm in months or years, or they've just kind of decided, I'm not going to be with anyone, and they close that door, if you will. and and they're not experiencing what I think is probably not only healthy for our minds, but isn't sex and the act of orgasm healthy for our bodies as well?
Yeah. Um, in a lot of monogamous marriages, that orgasm gap manifests in the following way. He thinks, oh, well, she's just not the kind of woman who can have an orgasm from intercourse. And
Mm.
she thinks she isn't either. When in reality, orgasm is a learned skill. You're not born knowing how to have orgasms from penetrative sex. You have to develop the skill of it. And
Yeah.
that is being able to sustain sensation and get the kind of sensation that you need, especially when every day you need a different kind of sensation in a female body, especially because we run on a lunar cycle. What felt good the last time isn't what we wanted all this time during lovemaking. And yet we think we're supposed to have this steady state experience. And so couples just they don't even try to help her have the orgasm. That's just for him. And then how long is she going to want to keep having intercourse if she's not having orgasms? It's not going to be satisfying to her. She's going to tell herself, oh, I like the closeness, I do it for him, a
Hmm.
million other reasons why she's sacrificing herself
Yeah.
and not getting the pleasure that she deserves. And so I really appreciate being here today, because if I help one woman realize, oh, you mean maybe I am the kind of woman who can have an orgasm from intercourse? Because if you're in a heterosexual monogamous relationship, you're probably going to have intercourse. That's what our male body partners find the most satisfying. And we do too, once we learn how. I like to say, you have to learn how to cross the gasm chasm. You have to learn how to bridge the orgasm gap that
Yeah.
Dr. Mintz talked about and highlighted is so common. And interestingly enough, in same-sex partners with two women, that women know how to give each other orgasms. And so it really does come down to just understanding a lot of what I teach is anatomy. How does what is the clitoral structure? Where do you find it in your vulva? How do you get the kind of stimulation that you need to cross that gasm chasm? And a lot of it does start with self-pleasuring, being
Yeah.
willing to find your way to your own pleasure so you can expand the amount of pleasure that you have. You can be in the sensation of orgasm, and then you can get to it when you're with a partner as well.
Yeah. I
And
think one of
sex,
the
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, it's so true and powerful, and what you're saying is spot on, no pun intended. But we have to get rid of the idea of that it's a dirty thing. And in America, I don't know how it is in other cultures or societies. I mean, I know a few of them that have been highlighted, but we have really made sex be this kind of dirty, grimy, not everyone, but overall, and the way that we're talking and teaching about it, or not talking about it and not teaching about it, it becomes like, should I be doing this, instead of, this is one of the most natural things that we can do. And, not only can it produce life, it also can produce a lot of pleasure.
Well, it's interesting that having good regular orgasms, it increases the length of your telomeres, which means your cells can replicate and you can live longer. You can improve your health span, not just your lifespan. Orgasms also reboot your nervous system. So if you're feeling anxious or upset or depressed, they're very good for that. Orgasms are very good for polycystic ovary syndrome and premenstrual cramping. Orgasms are something that allow you to be in a mindfulness state, because the brainwave state of orgasm is the theta brainwave state, and that is the same brainwave state as meditation. You can have an orgasmic meditation practice that allows you to regularly go into mindfulness states that allow you to connect with source, with Gaia. Um, and it lets a lot of good flooding of neurotransmitters and hormones happen when you make love. Of course, if you're making love with a partner, you're getting oxytocin, which
Mm-hmm.
is the bonding hormone that makes you feel connected to others and less lonely. I mean, there's just scads of reasons why having good sex is not only good for us, but our birthright and natural and appropriate. And we have so many things to counteract the repressive nature of our society, the degradation of imagery and pornography that makes women look like we're objects. Madison Avenue telling us our bodies aren't beautiful. The
Yeah.
fact that women never get to we never look at our vulvas, and we never get to see other women's vulvas, to see how every single one of them is just as beautiful as the next. They're like a whole botany of a field of flowers of remarkable beauty.
Mm.
And we feel shamed about things, our bodily fluids and our responses and desires. We're not taught to honor our needs being ever changing and wanting sometimes to be held and sometimes to be ravished, and that it's okay to have all those feelings. I mean, there's just so much missing from the communication that we get. All the communication that we get is abstinence, shame, fear tactics, and it's a
Right.
wonder anybody has sex.
I know. Well, yeah, and the ones who do, it becomes so kind of like this. I don't know. It's just, there's a very strange. I always think about, when I'm on the road and see the pullover stops, the adult stores and I've seen some of those stores in bigger cities that are very classy and they're very educational and they're there to
Mhm.
help people. But there it is this really stark dichotomy almost. It's like, the sex people and then the sexual people
Yeah.
almost,
Or
and
sensual.
Sensual people, right.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I think most of us, not even just in the act of sex, but the whole feeling, the embodiment of feeling vulnerable and
Yeah.
sexy and what I would call like our divine diva, feeling really encased in that safe space of our lushness and everything that we have to offer as women, and also respecting and honoring the strength of the man or the other feminine, whomever we're choosing to be with.
Yeah.
It is one of the I guess most intimate ways that we are seen,
Yeah.
and for those of us who will allow ourselves to be seen, it can be a very connecting kind of experience. But then again, as we've already said, if you have so much shame wrapped around it and you feel unworthy or and beautiful, not beautiful or invisible, then it can be really hard, I'm sure, to connect in that way.
There are
So,
so many good trauma healers. I mean, you and
yeah,
I both have been traumatized. Most people have been sexually traumatized.
yeah,
And if you haven't been, you're likely with a partner who has.
hmm,
So a lot of times the your partner's trauma is also creating trauma in your own sex life. I just got an email from a guy. One of the beautiful things about doing what I do, teaching passionate lovemaking techniques, is that people email me all the time and pour their heart out. And this one guy
yes,
said to me, I've been married for 2.5 years, and my wife she's gone through a lot of sexual trauma and she really doesn't like sex. And I feel badly that I'm forcing myself on her when really what I want to do is be close and show her how good sex can be. And now I've started second guessing myself and I'm losing my erection. And now she thinks I don't find her attractive. And, what do I do? And
mm,
that's a really good example of marrying into trauma
yes,
that will affect you. And the thing is too, Leah, that I get emails from guys that write to me and say, I've been married for 50 years and
mm,
it's been going on this long. What do I do?
yeah,
So the issue is, if you don't deal with it and deal with it early, the minute you see it, then it just perpetuates and it
yes,
ruins your sexual life. And then all that beautiful connection goes missing. It
yeah,
goes by the wayside. It's squandered. Your soul connection, your heart connection, your pleasure connection, your cosmic connection to the lover sphere, all of those things are not yours at all to have because you weren't able to overcome the trauma. And you and I both are women who have overcome, I believe I am, and I believe
yes,
you are, a woman
yes,
who has overcome sexual trauma to go on and have a whole and positive sex life. It is
hmm,
something that you can simply work through and get beyond and let
yes,
go. And interestingly enough, the work is getting to compassion for your
yes,
transgressor, which is a
yes.
big leap for someone who's in the throes of being traumatized.
Oh,
But that
yes,
is actually, I always like to say, okay, well, what's the end goal? Here's the path. The path is that you look back on the 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 trauma and you go, wow, I'm not as bad off as the person who did that to me. I'm going to be okay.
yeah,
I have a really nice giveaway. It's a video and an ebook that I created with Dr. Keisha Ewers. She is a trauma healing expert
hmm,
and a Tantra teacher.
mm,
And because I'm the teaching you passionate lovemaking techniques person, and she's the trauma healing person,
right,
we came together to create a free download called Rewriting Your Libido Story.
mm,
We end up having a story for what's happened to us that can be the only story we identify with, or we can choose to work through it and rewrite a new one for ourselves.
yes,
And that's at libidobook.com. And it's a free download that Keisha and I did together for people who do feel like there's something holding on to their ankle and they can never get away from that
yeah,
trauma. They keep getting triggered by the things that happened to them in the past. So
yes.
that might be a good thing if
Yeah,
you
that's a great
feel,
offering. Thank you for
Sure.
offering that for free. And for those who are listening, all of Susan's info will be in our show notes, so you can find it there. And it sounds very familiar or very similar to the work in my book, Overcoming Toxic Emotions, which is about how to rewrite our emotional imprints and, of course, our traumas, and get into release our attachment to the storyline and get into a new vibrational frequency with where we want to go in our lives. And it is critically important.
Yeah.
So you talk about something and part of in your work called well, I don't know exactly what it's called, but with the soulmates. What is your program
Yeah.
with the soulmates and sex?
Yeah, I have a book called Sexual Soulmates, The Six Essentials to Connected Sex. It actually came about because a good friend of mine is Ariel Ford, and she's written a number of books in the Soulmate series. How to turn your mate into how to find a soulmate is really her thing. She works with single women. And when she was coming out with her last book, How to Turn Your Mate into Your Soulmate, she said, "Will you write my sex chapter for me? You're my sex goddess." And I said, "Okay, how to turn your mate or a date into your sexual soulmate. What would that take? What would it look like if you were going to say, okay, I don't want sex. I want sexual soulmatery. I want
Mm-hmm.
that kind of heart connected, passionate, conscious, pleasurable sex where I don't have anything that's holding me back from my joy around my connection." And I thought about all the people who have written to me over the last 15 years and all the advice that I've given out. And I thought, what are the things that really move the needle with regard to transforming having sex into making love? And the six are, and I'm gonna drag my book out and make sure I get them all right for you, because when you've written 35 books, sometimes
You forget what's in them. I get
you
it.
can't remember. So the first one is presence, learning how to stay in our body and
Mm-hmm.
stay connected in our heart to our partner. And especially when you've had trauma, you
Yes.
want to dissociate, you want to
Yes.
get away. And
Right.
so, how do you stay connected and not spin out?
Yeah.
The second thing is creating lover space, which is setting the scene for pleasure. Too many people are under the belief that you should just have this spontaneous, passionate experience. And that might be great the first couple times you have sex, but after that, it's a lot nicer if you have candlelight, good music, a pitcher of water, some quality organic lubricants, some nice soft clean towels. The lighting is a nice, it's a comfortable lighting, a comfortable heat, etc.
Right.
Setting the room up,
Mm-hmm.
setting yourself up for success so that you can
Yeah.
relax and surrender to your pleasure together. So you're not getting up to get things.
It sounds like being really intentional about having the
It,
sex.
it is, because if you feel guilty about your sexuality and your desire, you're not going to go create a beautiful place to have sex, because you're going to feel guilty.
Right.
Like, this is shameful, this is wrong. So in having intention and creating an intentional space, you're moving away from the
Mm-hmm.
programming that tells you you should be ashamed about it.
Yeah.
The next is something called the Sexual Soulmate Pact. And it's an agreement that the two of you will ask for what you need in the moment and not take it personally, that it's not a correction, that it's actually just a request and then a thank you. Just
Mm.
a request, and I've got you, baby. How is this? Softer
Yeah.
still? Or do you want me to hold you tighter?
Because
Or
if we
am I
don't say,
getting the
they
right
don't
spot?
know.
How can you know? Because the spots change and they move
Right.
around all the time. The spots are a moving target. um, the other thing is really about the fact that he's a light switch and she is a wood burning fire,
Mm.
that the masculine is much more aroused more quickly and ready to go faster than the feminine. And there are men who are very slow at warming up as well. I'm not saying it's just because you're a woman or a man, but generally testosterone versus estrogen, testosterone's ready to go and estrogen takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so I teach this notion of small offers, which is giving, not saying, do you want to have sex? But how about a neck rub? Can I hold you? Come over here and let me hold you. Um, I've been recently brushing my husband's hair. and he's been
Mm.
loving it. Just small acts of connection and sensual pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
rather than thinking about sex as this giant goal,
Right.
starting with much smaller, more sensual things. I mean, there's different kinds of touch. There's nurturing touch, there's healing touch, there's sensual touch, and there's sexual touch. And too often, we're starting with sexual touch when what we
Yeah.
need is, you need your back rubbed. You need some THC cream on the
Just
burn that you
connection.
got. You need to be
Yeah.
held. You need to be loved. You
Yeah.
need to be adored. You need to be told what I love about you. Let me tell you some
Mm-hmm.
things I love about you and adore about you. We need
Mm-hmm.
that verbal encouragement and approval. And then really using our senses. You know, a lot of people, when I say I like to turn friction into lovemaking, um, a lot of people, they close their eyes, the lights are off. You talked about body shame earlier. The lights are off, the eyes are closed, you know, you're under the covers, what have you.
Yeah.
Instead of tuning into your hearts, connecting your breath, looking into each other's eyes, really seeing each other. This is what I call having embodied sex. And
Mm-hmm.
embodied sex is what allows us to relax and
Yeah.
connect. And so that's very important. And then, last but not least, a little thing I like to call erotic play dates, which is that couples don't have as much sex as they want, partly because they're focused on having sex. And by sex, I mean they're focused on having intercourse. And intercourse is fantastic. And having orgasms from intercourse is a learned skill for women. So if you don't have them now, keep trying to have them, because you just need to learn how.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot, it's interesting, Leah, there are a lot of sexperts out there who are younger than I. I'm 60 and I've been doing this for a long time. And I see my young women coming up, and some men, but mostly women are drawn to this world of teaching sex. And they say, it's not all about intercourse. Focus on the clitoris. And what they don't realize is that the clitoris actually is an entire structure in our vulva that's one of three erectile tissue systems. The other being the urethral sponge, which some people call a G spot, but it's not a spot, it's a giant area, and the perineal sponge that are literally wrapped around the vaginal canal. And yet, when we focus just on the tip, and that's the thing that has to be touched, we're not activating the entire vulva, and then we're
Ah.
not able to have orgasms from intercourse. And so once you begin to activate the yoni, and yoni is the tantric lovemaking word for the female genitalia,
Mm-hmm.
lingam is the tantric lovemaking word for the penis. So the yoni and the lingam, they're made to fit together. We're in, not that same sex love isn't just as good, but
Yeah.
the yoni and the lingam are made to fit together. And most of us are in heterosexual monogamous relationships. And if we don't learn how to have those, essentially be an orgasm the entire time we're making love, both of us, if we can't
Right.
expand our orgasmic pleasure potential to be feeling orgasm the entire time we're inside each other,
Mm-hmm.
then we've got some things we can learn,
Yeah.
and we have some things to activate. And this is what erotic play dates are for. Instead of thinking about, we're going to have sex, let's think about, well, how about sensual massage? How about genital massage, a lingam massage, a yoni massage, oral pleasuring, not just lovemaking, full body touch, being held and holding, learning new orgasm skills,
Mm-hmm.
playing and finding new things to do together. And so if you want to be sexual soulmates, it's not just about great intercourse. That's very important, but it's also about learning new things together. Couples that play together stay together,
Yeah.
especially in the bedroom.
And
And so
also, I would
planning that.
assume for women to be able to learn to speak up and ask for what they need, and this isn't just a one-sided event. You know, I think a lot of couples that have been together a long time, or for women who don't know how to use their voice or ask for what they're really needing and wanting, it kind of just becomes this thing to satisfy the man, you know,
Yeah.
or and we have to really change that paradigm in our own, and stop abandoning our own desires and learn how to show up and say, As you said, this isn't a personal attack. You're not doing something wrong, but let me tell you what would feel even better, what would feel great for me. And that's
Yeah.
different for every person on every day, right?
Yes, and that's the Sexual Soulmate Pact. And you can get that at sexualsoulmatepact.com. Just download it. And then you can have your partner read that too. And you can enter into the agreement to just ask for what you need in the moment, because it is a constantly moving landscape. We're
Yeah,
always different in every moment. We're always growing. We're always maturing. We're always changing. We're always
right.
expanding if we're lucky, right?
Yeah.
Your listeners are, they're oriented toward expansion. And
Yeah.
so the Sexual Soulmate Pact is really the communication skill, is the foundation of all of the rest of being sexual soulmates.
And Susan, I wanted to ask you, this question just came to mind. For people who are trying to consciously be aware in their relationship and in their partnership and in their sexuality and um, sexual experience with themselves and others, what about fantasy?
Yeah.
People who have a very active imagination or like to incorporate fantasy or play, that kind of play, role play into their lovemaking. Can it still be a connected, sacred kind of exchange between two people, or does the fantasy take one into another realm and kind of leave the other person there to figure out the rest?
Well, it depends on the fantasy, I guess. You can
Yeah.
have a fantasy that is very honoring. You can create ritual. You can do yum yum. You can have tantric sex. You can have an expanded orgasm date. These are all types of experiences that you co-create, that you decide to have, that are considered fantasy.
Mm.
So there's fantasy, there's dirty talk, and I don't really like the word dirty talk, but it's what everybody kind of understands
Yeah.
is pillow talk, sensual talk. You can make love and tell each other stories, while fantasy stories while you're making love. That can be really exciting too. Or giving a sensual massage and telling a dirty story or a fantasy
Hmm.
story. These are all just additional facets of joy and pleasure that you can co-create with a partner.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Susan, thank you so much for your expertise and your encouragement. And I hope everyone listening finds a little inspiration to more freedom and more play and more joy in their own sexuality, with themselves, with others, and throughout the rest of their lives. Because as you said, it just keeps getting better, right? It doesn't stop at a certain point. I know for myself, I'm entering that age of the change. I'm in perimenopause, and
Mhm.
and I have girlfriends who've been telling me how awful it is, to go through the physical changes of the body. And so, even with that, there's this negative conversation that happens of, oh, it's all going to be over soon, and oh, this isn't going to feel as good, and this is going to hurt, and it's just. And I really appreciate wisdom coming from someone like you and this conversation, because it doesn't have to go south. It doesn't have to go to this terrible, uncomfortable place. It can continue to be a joyful, rich experience in our lives.
Yeah, well, I'm 60 and I've never had better sex than now.
There you
I'm
go.
having the best sex of my life at 60, and I expect it to get even better because I'm still learning. There's so
That's
much to
great.
learn. It's a never ending joy, your sexuality. It's the same as learning how to cook and cranking out new delicious meals and enjoying them. It's the same as discovering new friends and expanding the depth of your connection with your family. It's as good as the health that you have and the strength in your body and enjoying your physicality. These are all the gifts of humanity, and our
Yeah.
sexuality is one of the jewels in the crown of that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'll be looking for more of your fascinating work online and other places. And again, for those who are interested in Susan's work, you can find all of her information in our show notes. And we'll see you next time.